This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the news that you might have missed this morning. We also take a look at the political pieces that we call contours in this country. Today is the 8th of December 2020 and I am Miss Gay.
I'm JM.
And I am GK. In case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, Uhuru-RUTO allies hold secret talks. In the Standard, Senator's 21-hour date that ended in ICU. And in the Star, Uhuru's 929 billion shilling COVID-19 recovery plan. And I think we begin there with the Star.
Yes, so there is a recovery plan underway. This is the post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy.
Yep.
And the Star says that it's taken a sneak peek into this 929B and how the government intends to use it. So 21.4 billion we're told is for security, 43 billion for health, 30 billion for ICT, 18 billion for tourism, another 30 billion for agriculture, 23.5 billion for manufacturing, transport, and so on and so forth.
So big amounts there.
Big amounts of money. The biggest going to education,
Yeah.
383B, and transport, 101B.
Nice.
And so we're told here that the government seeks to tax wealthy individuals. They seek to remove tax exemptions, to expand the donor base, to restructure debt, and to issue sovereign bonds, in particular a green bond, to raise this money for the recovery. Almost 1 trillion shillings.
Yeah.
Quite a large sum of money, which I think is much needed at this point.
Yeah. I know a lot of people are going to complain about the taxes, given that we've had a very rough year this year. However, I like the idea that we have a good recovery strategy. It is ambitious, because the whole world seems to want to build back better. So how do you have more inclusive economies and societies? We've seen the gaps that were there this year. They were made quite apparent. But I also see the thread of sort of poverty reduction, eradication with every move that the government is choosing to spend in this budget. Because when the government spends, money moves around in an economy and there's a trickle-down effect. I really like the part on debt restructuring. And this is because the West should also realize how important it is to restructure our debt, because because you cannot squeeze water from a stone. If we don't have anything, we won't pay you back anything. So I think recovery has to be looked at sort of in a universal way. So I'm excited about this. Hopefully they also allocate some money to the COVID-19 vaccine when it's out.
Definitely.
It will be important. So we have a 3-part criteria that we're going to use to break down the headlines. We'll ask ourselves, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And is it thoughtful or just plain lazy? Thought it's very thoughtful. Groundbreaking, 929 billion. I think we should park it. Let us move to the Daily Nation, where we're being told that there are secret talks. Now, we talked about this yesterday. There have been secret talks being held, not so secret actually, talks being held between both sides. Those allied to the Deputy President and those allied to Uhuru Kenyatta. And now the push for consensus has boiled down to 3 sticky issues. One being the number of MPs proposed in the bill. 2, changing of the formula for the equalization fund, so that the kitty now should uplift what they perceive to be the neglected regions. And the third is the push for multiple choice referendum questions. And so RUTO's team has said, we should reduce the number of MPs, the women's representative seats, all those things should be, put in. They also are saying, in order for you to accommodate us, we are willing to do a new signature drive.
The train has already left the station.
They're willing to give us 5 million more signatures to accommodate their changes.
To be honest, I don't trust them.
And these things that they're suggesting, particularly the multiple choice referendum issue, as we said last week, it's very complicated, I think, for our electorate and for most electorates across the world to navigate all these different issues. So that's designed to fail from the beginning. And that's what the DP's team wants. So it's really in bad faith
I do agree. I do agree with Raila when he said that if you, instead of pushing for that, just join the no campaign
and lead
exactly.
it. Yeah, and lead it. Well, you know what they say: if you cannot convince them, you should confuse them. And I think there's multiple questions,
and that's what they're doing. They want to confuse this other camp. Absolutely.
What I like about the yes and no simple thing is that you pick sort of the best of what you like, and you
or
go
of
with
the worst, as we do when we're picking new politicians. For once, feel like us.
Best of the West bunch. So guys, let's move to the Standard for the last story.
I really wish I don't understand why it made the headline.
Yes.
However, in this story, Machakos Senator Boniface Kabaka went on, as it suggests a date. He went to a hotel, not a hotel room, an apartment. He then was joined by a lady who, unfortunately, they mentioned her name. This is unfortunate, I say, because you don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Then he fell sick, suddenly collapsed, and was taken to Nairobi Hospital, where he is currently fighting for his life in the ICU.
Yeah, what a long date. 21 hours.
Yeah, 21 hours. I do agree that he is fighting for his life, and I bear that in mind, and I empathize with his family. I also do note that it is stated here that by the family that he's a man of high moral standing whose integrity is above reproach and unimpeachable. I, however, would have nothing to say personally. I would, however, like to quote Forbes magazine, who says that men who cheat on their wives are more likely to die of cardiac arrest during sex. And they quote a scientific statement from the American Heart Association, a paper that was written, where they did an autopsy of 5,559 instances of sudden death. And I can't question science, so I will just repeat what they said. And they said that of the subjects who died during coitus, 82 to 93% were men, and a majority, 75%, were having extramarital activity, in most cases with a younger woman, in an unfamiliar setting, and after the excessive use of food and alcohol. Then I will end by saying that he who has no sin cast the first stone. Toss it.
Well, before we toss, there's one thing you mentioned, all the adjectives that have been used to describe the senator. That is usually an alarm bell.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a house on the market and the signpost reads the best house you've ever seen, lovely, spacious, beautiful, all those adjectives, then you know it is not.
Yeah.
You're walking into a trap.
I'm going to toss it for being so speculative. But thank you for your facts, Miss K. So it's between the Star and the Daily Nation. I quite like the Star. It's positive. It's looking forward. Telling us we're going to recover soon.
That is true. I like the Star.
I'll toss the Nation as well. Onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country, where we also have a three-part criteria. We ask ourselves, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And is it effective or just plain lazy? Can we begin with the Star?
Yeah, so in the Star we have a fairly humorous cartoon here of Uhuru by a board writing BBI content and he's drawing lines there while Raila keeps the door shut. And he's outside the window is William Ruto peeping in, and the caption there says there's still a window of opportunity to create consensus. So he really wants in, but Raila clearly wants him out.
I shut the door so quickly.
Moving on, yeah. It's quite funny.
So humorous cartoon.
It's humorous.
Let's park it in the Standard.
In the Standard, we have a caricature of Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni seated on his presidential seat in his room, where he has his generals in a meeting and they're asking, why can't we contain him? Well, sir, he's just like the young Yoweri Museveni.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And I think this is in reference to Bobi Wine, who said in a tweet that I am fighting for your freedom. Yeah. All of you have to become freedom fighters to fight for your freedom. Some of us will die, but it will be for the greater cause.
Go Bobi Wine.
But really, Gado, to be fair, cannot compare Bobi Wine with Museveni.
They're not even in the same.
No, they're not in the same league. I do agree.
They're not in the same league. I mean, Museveni is a liberator, a soldier, a war hero, an intellectual, a public intellectual.
Hey, but listen, Bobi Wine is trying to be the same for his people. It's the same people for his people.
What? But he has no intellectual depth compared to
you have to look
Museveni.
At the context. I do agree that you have to look at the context, and in the context within which Museveni was a freedom fighter when he was younger is much different from this, and even the streets that he fought, the forests,
far different.
I think we toss this one outright.
Toss it. Okay, where is it? Here's the Standard. Go on.
So we have the Daily Nation, and here we have a very somber cartoon. We have a hangman's noose. And the noose actually is a stethoscope, a doctor's stethoscope. And the caption there is when healthcare workers are forced to work without PPEs. And I think it's coming off the health workers saying that they're going to go on strike. Raila also appealing to doctors to sort of be understanding. However, our doctors are in that front line, and I think we need to meet them halfway. If they're going to keep their end of the bargain, which is the oath that they took, then we also need to do our bit.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Yeah? I don't even want to toss it because
I say we just keep it
just
in the
keep
parking
it.
bay.
We'll
But
keep it, but I really like the star as the winning cartoon.
Yeah.
I do agree.
All
Star.
right.
There you have it. The star gives us our winning cartoon. And now for our final thought. But before we get there, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Our final thought today is inspired by the book The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam.
Yeah.
David Halberstam was an American writer, journalist, and historian who, at the time of his death in 2007, had published more than 16 books. He received a Pulitzer Prize in 1964 for his coverage of the Vietnam War as a staff reporter, that's between 1960 and 1967, for the New York Times. And he used his content to publish this book, The Best and the Brightest, in 1972. It is a bitter critique of America's involvement in Vietnam. In Halberstam's view, the Vietnam War was one of the costliest mistakes ever undertaken by American policymakers.
Yeah.
In the book, Halberstam attempts to diagnose the problem in the decision-making process towards the war. He asks how the gifted leaders assembled by the Kennedy and the Johnson administrations could have been allowed such a tragic involvement in Vietnam. And his book was his first bestseller. He says it's because he had something in his gut that he had to share. I will explain to you why he called them the best and brightest. The best and brightest of their time, John F. Kennedy, Walt Whitman Rostow, McGeorge Bundy, who was a national security advisor for President Lyndon Johnson, Robert McNamara, who was Kennedy's defense secretary, and Dean Rusk, who was Kennedy's Secretary of State. The central lesson of this book, and he says this, and I quote, it's where the title is borrowed from, that the people who appeared to be highly qualified to hold power can nonetheless carry out policies of monumental stupidity. Speaking about a gentleman called Robert Lovett, who was one of the fourth defense secretary, and who was actually, this is stated in passing, but it said that John Kennedy's father told him that to give him any job he pleased in the cabinet.
Wow.
But thankfully Lovett refused, but he became the president's advisor.
Yeah.
Speaking about him, he quotes that Lovett lived in a world where young men made their way up the ladder by virtue not just of their own brilliance and ability, but also of who their parents were. Which phone calls from which old friends had preceded their appearance in an office.
Yeah.
The best and the brightest was not a pure meritocracy. They were a team who combined academic credentials with elite social backgrounds. And the term has acquired a sarcastic tinge. So don't be happy if anyone refers to you as the best
and
or the brightest. And the question the book tries to answer is this. If they were so smart, so well educated, of such good pedigree, how could they have gotten it all so wrong?
Wow. Yeah. Let me talk about two things. I'll talk about the Tet Offensive, but before that, I'll attempt to answer that question from this book and a few other sources and a few other documentaries I've seen on the Vietnam War. I think the first is cognitive tunneling. And cognitive tunneling is when you are so skewed, you're very narrow-minded in your way of thinking about a particular situation. And I think that's how the Americans and that entire cabinet of Kennedy passed on to LBJ, found themselves in with the Vietnam War. And in regard to getting into the war in the first place, so that you don't have other states collapsing into communism. And they found that it was necessary to do that. And then, but number two, also committing the boots onto the ground. They just got really in a space where they couldn't think in any other sort of paradigm. And then the second thing is cognitive closure. Once they'd made up their minds, they had decided, this is it, we're not changing our minds. We've got to go in and we've got to win this war. And the third, sunk costs fallacy. And this is when you really have the tendency not to cut your losses, even when you see that the losses are coming in thick and fast, as Jeff Koinange would say. And so the Tet Offensive, very briefly, was an instance which eroded support for the war amongst the American public and the American political establishment. And even in the face of this offensive, the Americans still continue to commit resources into the Vietnam War. So I'll just describe a little bit of it. And the offensive derives its name from the Vietnamese New Year holiday, during which the attacks occurred. And so on these on the 31st, or rather on the 30th of December 1968, they decided to 30th of January 1968, not December. They celebrate the New Year in January. They decided to the North Vietnamese soldiers decided to attack South Vietnam, and they took hold of certain landmarks. And here we're told there was a military base in the South Vietnamese, the cities, citadels, major government buildings, and they actually succeeded for quite a bit of time until the 2nd of March. They really had held down this city of Hue, as what they called it, and that's where the siege was. And the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, they lost a lot more soldiers than the Americans, and so it was a tactical defeat of sorts. But it really had a sharp psychological blow on the ordinary American citizens. And this is when they really began to pile pressure on the government and on their leaders to rethink the strategy on Vietnam and to withdraw altogether.
Wow. I really liked reading about the Vietnam War. There's so much I didn't know. But when you talked about cognitive tunneling, I felt to myself, this was a whole country in a cognitive tunnel. So it's been said that this war was a logical derivative of the Cold War. So that the Vietnam War was not the brainchild of just 3 or 4 people. It was a product of a way of thinking about the world, for better or worse. And so the logical consequence of a policy of containment for America was that you will do anything to contain and stop the rise of communism. And that's what they thought, if Vietnam falls into the hands of the other side, that's what would have happened. When you talked about the best and the brightest, Kennedy himself could be termed as the best and the brightest, and he constantly needed to prove himself. And you find that at the beginning of the Vietnam sort of interaction, the people who would advise these presidents also felt like the Soviets had been pushing their buttons from all the way as far back as the Cuban Missile Crisis. So you have a situation where they're tense generally. But there are some lessons that McNamara, the former Secretary of Defense, when he reflects back on the Vietnam War, that he thinks are still useful now. And I'll go through them quickly. One of them is that America didn't empathize with their opponent enough. And by this, he says that America didn't understand their enemy well enough. And he said that the problem was caused by the US, firstly, ignoring the history of the people of Indochina and the thinking that they were motivated by factors that were unimportant to them. But America needed to understand those factors in order to fight this war. The second thing was try and communicate with your opponent. So, and he says that this is true of war, business, and politics. Find out what each other's requirements are and see if you can come to the table at some point. He says that there was no direct contact between President Johnson and Ho Chi Minh during the entire conflict. Which I think maybe they could have saved a lot more lives had they just come to the table sooner. He also says that the rules of war are really important. Setting the frameworks by which rules, the rules of war will occur, setting acceptable standards, because I think there was huge amounts of torture and death on both sides. And he says that even till today, countries like the US have not signed on to the Rome Statute and ICC and things like that, which make it difficult. To sort of govern their behavior. And then the last thing was listen to your allies. He says that America never really listened to its allies when it came to the Vietnam War. And then the third thing, which I really liked, was this idea of the fog of war. So there's a whole documentary about it, but it's a military term about how once a battle begins, information that was once tactically quite relevant can become confusing and even distorted. And you have to be able to discern what's actually happening. And he says that a lot of what happened was that, like, McNamara himself, as an advisor, was a man who hated failure. He despised it in others, and he was very action-oriented. And his instinct was always to do something, to move something, and above all, try something. So you have this idea that a man who has to do something, he's in a fog of war, so he doesn't have all the relevant sort of information that is good to make those decisions. And then you have a government with a lot of resources making the war continue. So the sunk cost fallacy that JM sort of talked about. And so this is what Ms. Kay was talking about, when you have a lot of resources, a lot of intellect, but leading to monumentally stupid policies and decisions being carried out. And so I like that the author asks us, is America doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again? We see in Iraq again, same sort of context playing out. So we hope that they will learn at some point. So on a day, guys, when we had winning headline from both the Star and a winning cartoon from the Star, I want to leave you with a quote. And the quote is, "No one who goes to war believes once he is there that it is worth the cost to fight it by half measures. War is far too horrible a thing to drag out unnecessarily. And no other national endeavor requires as much unshakable resolve as war. If the nation and the government lack that resolve, it is criminal to expect men in the field to carry it alone." So a lot of the men who were fighting in Vietnam felt that they were sacrificing so much, but then you also had a lot of people back home not supporting the war. So, you know, it felt like it was a wasted sort of sacrifice. And in the end, Edmund Burke told us, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel, but find us on TV. We're on GoTV, Prime Vita, and Star TV.